All right, hello. Welcome to what is going to end up being the part two of chapter one of my lectures. I'm William Wright, Professor William Wright, uh, talking about Mark Getlein's Living with Art, and we are talking about chapter one, actually, not chapter two, chapter one, but this is part two of chapter one. My first video, I didn't realize there was a time limit, so I guess it cut off, and I'm going to have to go back a little bit in the slides because I'm not really sure exactly when it cut off, but now I know we're going to have to do multiple parts. So here we go. Part two of chapter one in Living with Art. Okay, so we were talking about the appearance of art in art itself, like how we make things appear in art. So again, I'm probably going over some slides. I'm just went back to like the most natural kind of starting point that hopefully we got to in the other video. But we were talking about art and appearance. We had talked about style and some other things, and so we were talking about here the different way that artists choose to depict things when they are making their art. So the choice number one of three is representational art, right? Meaning it is something from the world that we are supposed to recognize, right? It is often recreated as realistically as possible. This is also known as naturalistic. I do often say realistic is not always the right word to use because realism is its own art movement that actually relates more to depicting real life things, not just like the saints or like spiritual figures or royals, right? That you're going to paint real people doing real things in real scenes, right? That's what realism means. Naturalistic is the word that we're actually going to choose to use to say that something looks really, really real. It's very skillful and looks real. So most representational art is trying to go for a naturalistic look, although it's not always, trying 100%. It's just meant to be skillful, right? And look like something we really recognize right away. It looks like the real life thing. So here we see this painting, the Annunciation, and I'm going to keep the artist sort of secret for a minute, but it's a beautiful piece that you can see, the representational aspect of it. It looks like real life, okay? Style number two, I will say this one here, all three are something I really want you all to know, but the difference between abstract art, the nuances of abstract art, this is something, it's like what I always say would fit into like the top 5 things that I want you to learn from this class, because it is an important thing, and people use the word abstract too much, and it always kind of like, grates my nerves or something. I wouldn't say that. I don't want to be pretentious about it, but it does like kind of gets my attention because let's break down abstract. After representational looking like the real world, we have abstract, and it is not splatters and dots. Okay, that's what irks me. Abstract art is actually something that we know from the real world. The artist is inspired by something from the real world, and we usually recognize it. We can see the connection that the artist made to the real life thing. So while they're looking at real life, unlike representational, they are simplifying, exaggerating, or altering the artwork in some way to make it original, to change the perspective, to change the way that it's viewed. This is stylizing, it's changing it using often a distinctive set of characteristics or parameters, either an artist or a cultural movement, but basically choosing a style. We already talked about style in the other slides, but it's just changing it in this really specific way. So that it's not that it doesn't look like the thing, but it doesn't look like the thing like it does in the real world. I like to compare like cartoons and anime are a good thing. So like Homer Simpson, we know it's a real person and it's inspired by a real person, but nobody looks like Homer Simpson, right? At the end of the day, we look at this image here on the right, and I usually ask my students, what do you see? And they say a girl or a person right there, and they're playing some sort of instrument. A mandolin is actually what it's going to be, but it's some sort of string instrument. And then I ask, once they know that they're looking at a girl playing a string instrument, I ask, does it look like that? And at the end of the day, no, it doesn't. This does not look like a person, really. It's very angular. It doesn't have facial features. It's very altered, but we know it's inspired by the real person. So that's what makes it abstract. And sorry, I need to take a drink here. This altering is what makes it abstract. And now, fun fact: this piece is by Pablo Picasso. Many of you probably already knew that by looking at it, and you might have seen it before. But did you know that this painting, if I can get it to react. Hold on. This painting, The Annunciation, is actually also by Picasso. It was done when he was, I think, 12, maybe 13. And this is when he was, the child prodigy that was going to grow up to become the artist that we all know. And I think it's important to teach this lesson because most people don't know he painted like this and then made the choice to paint abstract, to paint this geometric breakdown. He had the skills, he had the ability, but he made the choice to start altering the way things were depicted, right? Abstracting. Okay. Now let's talk about non-representational art. This is the splatters and dots. So a lot of people like to call, Jackson Pollock or Robert Motherwell, any of those like splatter type paintings, abstract art, but it's not really true. That's actually a misuse of the term abstract. Abstract is just changing something. Non-representational is when you make something that doesn't relate to anything outside of itself. Non-representational relates to nothing outside itself. This is the splatters and dots. It's purely form. It's line, it's shape, it's space, it's color. It's not just splatters and dots. It's anything that's just pure formal elements. It doesn't look like a cat or a building or a place or a thing. There's no story, there's no narrative. That's what a lot of people think, like, what is this trying to say when they look at Jackson Pollock? But at the end of the day, he's not trying to say anything. It's just he's providing an experience. There's no statement to Mondrian. There is a statement to Mondrian's actually, but it's a broader statement. At the end of the day, it's just about balance and simplicity. That's the experience that he wants you to have. This is non-representational. Okay, so non-representational, abstract, and representational. These are things I really want you to know the difference between. Moving from there, let's talk about art and meaning. Okay, now I do want to separate form from content. So the first slide here on this that I want to talk about is the form of an art piece is the physical appearance of the work. Is it 2D or 3D? What color is it? What are the shapes? Are there people? How many? Are there animals? Where is everything in the image, right? So what are these things? What's physically going on in it? This is the form. So we look here at this sculpture. The form is that it's a sculpture. It's 3D. It is made of bronze or some sort of metal. It is of a person. There is no color. They are sitting and they're thinking, right? It's the thinker. That's what's going on. That's the form, right? That's the actual object that's in front of you. Okay, moving from that, in relation to that, content. Content is it's the content of an artwork is the story or the meaning. What is happening and where and why is it possibly happening? Okay, so looking at this painting by Renoir, the content is it's a party. It's an outdoor party. There are people hanging out. Most of them seem happy. Maybe they're drinking. Maybe they're in their cups. They're talking. They're being social. Maybe they're being a little coy in ways. But yeah, it's the story of just a party, right? And that's what's happening now. It's often also called subject matter. A lot of times we don't call it content when we're talking about splatters and dots, right? Because it's less of a story, and we call it subject matter, which the subject matter in splatters and dots is the formal elements, right? The elements of art. But at the end of the day, the content, the subject matter, that's all about what is going on, what the meaning is, what's the statement. That's the content. Form is the physical thing. Content is the story, the occurrence, or what the point is. Okay. Sometimes what it is made of is the content. Okay. So looking here at Janine Antoni, some of her pieces. She's one of my favorite artists. This piece here it's a block of chocolate and a block of lard. And what Janine Antoni basically did here was she would take a bite of the chocolate each day and shape it, or a bite of the lard each day and shape it. And what she would shape it into, she would shape the chocolate into this empty case, this empty heart case that would usually house chocolate pieces, right? And then the lard she would have shaped into lipstick. Okay. Now, the content or the form is obviously block of chocolate, block of lard, chocolate box make lipstick, right? But that form matters a lot because in this essence, making a chocolate box, that's made of chocolate, but then we look at it and we say, okay, well, that chocolate box is empty. Why is it empty? Did someone eat all the chocolates, or is it just that the chocolates weren't there, right? The box itself is made of chocolate. I don't know what's going on there. I would say often that might signify, loneliness or something. Having, the fact that they're all gone is something kind of somber or sad. And then you contrast that to taking lard, shaping it into lipstick. Lipstick is something that we use to, ideally like make ourselves more beautiful, right? Makeup we use to make ourselves appear better or something. But to think that it's made of fat, which is something we usually don't say good things about, that's what a lot of makeup and lipstick is actually made from, some sort of lard or fat, and at the same time we use it to sort of cover up blemishes and things that we consider imperfect about ourselves, right? And then so you contrast makeup and cover up and hiding the idea of fat to the chocolate, which it's all gone, which is sort of sad, but it's also like that may not be healthy if one person ate all. I don't know. It's just it's a complex emotional idea, and I haven't really researched a ton of the specific intent of Ginny and Antoni, but we obviously see that the fact that it's chocolate, the fact that it's lard, matters as much as what it is shaped into, right? So the content is the form, right? Or the form is the content, right? Boom. So, oh yeah, here's another example of this. Mark Quinn. So he did this series of sculptures here. First off, he donated, or collected a lot of his own blood and then cast them into portraits of himself, which is weird. But the fact that it's his own blood, is it really gross? Because that's what he's made of, right? But yeah, I don't know. I saw these in person. They're pretty trippy. It's pretty weird. But at the end of the day, the fact that it's his own blood is part of the content, right? The form itself is just a sculpture of him. Here on the left, he did this sculpture, this cast of Kate Moss out of solid gold, which talks about like commoditizing a person's body, right? Kate Moss is a model. What does all of that mean, right? Content and form kind of intermixing here. Okay. So now let's talk about something that is different from both of those things, which is context. Now, do not get context and content mixed up. They are very different, although they kind of relate. Context is the personal, social, cultural, historical setting for a piece of art. In the place in which it is created, the place in which it is received, and the place from which it is interpreted. Okay, it's basically the time and place and for whom it was created, right? So all of this really matters. And here's a good example of one. We're looking here at another Pablo Picasso piece. This one's called Guernica. It's clearly very abstracted. It's a little bit distressing, sort of violent piece. It's all black and white, which is sort of somber, right? And yeah, and we look at this, we respond to it in a specific way just based on the elements that we see. But what you should know is that if you have a background on what this story is, if you have a background on Guernica, it's going to alter your perception of this piece, and that is context. So this painting was painted towards the end of World War II or during World War II, and Picasso, as an artist, he was avoiding his home in Spain because it was under a fascist dictator, Francisco Franco. Now, Francisco Franco was not necessarily in league. He was not an ally of the Nazis, but he did not dislike them a lot. He had his own like sort of fascist, intents. But in any case, in Spain, back home, there was a little village called Guernica that had a lot of people in it that did not support Francisco Franco's regime. And when the Nazis were basically testing their weapons of war, specifically the Luftwaffe, and their ability to bomb things. The flying, I guess the Air Force of Germany. They were testing their ability to bomb. They asked Franco, about testing, and Franco actually offered up essentially this town. And I guess I'm saying Franco's regime offered up this town of Guernica, saying, these are people that don't agree with me, so I don't really care if you just go ahead and blow them up. And the Nazis did. They bombed a city of innocent people. They weren't fighting against the Nazis. They were just not in agreement with Franco, who wasn't a friend of the Nazis anyway, but he was just sort of like, yeah, cool, go ahead, bomb them. In any case, so Now, if you were looking at this before I told that story, you probably didn't think a lot of it. But now, if you have the background of that story, and then imagine too that you're alive in the 1940s and in Spain, or Paris, or the United States, how all of that context would really matter. All that cultural background, that timing, and all of that. Picasso was commissioned to paint a large painting, I think, at the time that this happened, and he immediately decided that this was what the painting was going to be about. He drew it on a napkin. It's pretty amazing. You can find the sketch. But in any case, there's a movie about it. It's not a very good movie, but all of the time and the place and the reason for which it was made was very important. So that's why I talk about it. Okay. I don't know if many of you are familiar with Korn's Chutes and Ladders, but it's essentially Korn singing nursery rhymes in this sort of creepy heavy metal manner. um, and I really just bring it up to say, that's recontextualizing. That's taking something, a nursery rhyme, and changing its setting, putting it into like heavy metal, changes the way that it is. I know a lot of people don't like that I'm calling Korn heavy metal, but it is what it is. But in any case, yeah, changing its context in order to change the meaning is possible, and it's often encouraged in art, and that's called recontextualizing. But at the end of the day, it's really just all about art means different things to different people in different times and different places, and the way it's presented changes that. Okay. So here's a good example of another type of context sort of thing, or a symbolism, right? We're getting into symbolism here as we kind of close this chapter. So the linguists, or the tribes officials of the Akan rulers, they serve as translators, spokespersons, advisors, historians. Each linguist carries a staff, and on top of that staff is a specific sculpture that is a symbol of their office. Each is associated with a specific proverb, often about the nature of leadership and their power. So, seeing this staff, it is a beautiful single object with a sort of sculpture on it. But if you are from this tribe, it means something very specific about the person's position and about what you're expecting them to do. This is iconography, which we'll talk about in a second, also meeting context. Okay, so what does iconography mean? Iconography literally means the describing image. Okay, so it is a feature of some art that it's recognizable to some, and it can help us better understand the content. So basically, if you have the context to understand the icons, then you will better understand the content. So if you get the context, you'll get the content. Okay, so looking here at some, iconography in images of Buddha, the elongated ears mean, they relate to his earthly life before spiritual awakening. He wears monk's robes because, he's a spiritual guide. He has a bun on top of his head, which means enlightenment. Hand gestures, show meditation and balance. The position of the legs is a specific meditative position. The lotus flower symbolizes purity, and the halo behind Buddha is all about spiritual energy. So all these things have a specific thing they're telling us, and that is the iconography of this image or the culture around it. Okay. Here, just real quick, Jan van Eyck, we see this image here, and it tells us a lot just based on some simple icons. First off, or images that tell us something, through their symbolism. So the chandelier with only one candle lit means that they are rich enough to have lighting in their house. They have a chandelier, but they are not rich enough to have all the candles burning at the same time. They have both of their sets of shoes off, meaning they are at home. Right, that's a simple symbol. The dog, it's their pet. This is a domesticated dog at that. Right, this is not a wild animal in the scene. It's clearly like a froofy at-home dog. Domestication. The bottom right image kind of is a close-up of some fruit that's over here. That fruit, being that these people were being painted during the Renaissance in Northern Europe, where there wasn't going to be citrus fruit, it clearly shows that this person is a merchant, right? And that is how, that's why they have class. That's why they're getting this portrait made, right? Because they're merchant class. They're a little bit of an aristocracy. Oh, also, I like to point out that the artists actually painted themselves in the image. It's kind of interesting, and signed it above it. I think there's a movie kind of loosely based on this painting. Just fun fact, I think it has Duncan DeHaan and Alicia Vikander in it. I don't know. You should check it out. It's interesting. Fun movie just for kicks. This image too, a lot of people don't understand why this, you look at this image at first, you might think it's a shotgun wedding. But the reality is, a lot of times another symbol that slips into some artwork is the fact that the bride looks to be pregnant, but it really is meant to symbolize the possibility of pregnancy, not current pregnancy. Just fun fact. Okay. From there, yeah, I mean, we just have icons. Oh yeah, just talking about the idea of icons around Christianity, around spirituality. These are meaningful, yeah, spirits that we recognize, and it's kind of across religions, spiritual depictions of things. Okay, now moving from icon into process, real quick. So moving into the 20th century, a lot of artists began to understand that getting all this highfalutin idea of art had sort of moved away from ritual, right? And an artwork that was about the process and the story that it told in itself. Yeah, well, yeah, it's like the artwork, the way that it was made was not being highlighted as much as it should be, and sometimes in some other cultures, especially sort of like, I mean, sort of tribal pre-Western cultures, the act of making the art was almost more meaningful than the final thing itself. So we get into some things that are interesting, like performance art. We get into installation. So installation is this idea of creating an artwork that viewers can be a part of and move into. They get into the space and reflect on it. They get to be present as a piece of the, or as a part of the piece of art. All right, that's an installation, right? And that's a process in and of itself that as the viewer you get to take part in it. Guerrilla art also presents itself, which is like hidden messages, right? Like graffiti, like the Obey Shepherd Fairy guy. We'll talk about him later, but like, I don't know, guerrilla art, tagging, graffiti, all those things, like hidden messages. That's a new thing and again, it's sort of harkening back to the old ways of like the process being important, and the meaning behind it, rather than just having an artwork on a canvas in a museum, right? All that sort of stuff. And it sort of really again highlights that uh, the object versus the art, they're different things. The object can have art, but the process of it is art and life are inseparable. And in prior cultures to the modern Western culture, often regarded the creation of art as like some sort of act of life, and they 20th century artists began to feel that something had been lost when art was separated from life and placed in some sort of privileged realm. So we look beyond the West, other cultures, so that we look at like Navajo sand painting, which actually is also done in like mandala sand painting. And this is an example of where product and process cannot be separated. In this example of the Navajo, the Hatali is a healer, a specialist, a singer who calls upon the spirits while creating art, to solve some woe or some ill. It's basically a shaman. And a shaman is a person who acts as a medium between the human and spirit world. That goes beyond just Navajo. That's just like in general language. This is a person who, as an act of almost like medicine or spirituality, they're creating the artwork. They don't just make it; they create it as the act, and then the artwork itself will often be blown away. It'll be swept up. It'll be moved. This actually happens in an episode or several episodes of House of Cards. If you've ever seen that, these monks come and paint the artwork for like months, and then they just like sweep it up in the end. Pretty wild. But at the end of the day, yeah, it's just this connection between the process and the final thing. We start to think about, in the 20th century, how like fashion and, well, fashion's always been a thing, but even more so like ritual fashion, like costumes, masquerades, and things like that are being related to activities. They're art objects that relate to spiritual or ritual activities. Pretty interesting idea. Process versus object, or both happening at the same time. This kind of leads us to performance art pieces. Performance art brings back this is like the 20th century academic art version of those art processes of prior peoples. Yeah, they come back into the scene in the 20th century, and the temporariness of them is sort of embraced, right? They're we open our arms to the idea of theatrics during the act of it. Honestly, a lot of people don't realize that Jackson Pollock, in some ways, even is when he's splattering the paint, the act of splattering the paint, it's called action painting. That's actually more important than the finished painting itself. But we also have guys like Joseph Beuys who walked around talking to a dead hare. He painted himself and just talked to a dead hare. He also locked himself in a room with a coyote at one point in New York City. He was in this city, full of millions of people, and then didn't talk to any humans. He just sat in an apartment with a coyote. That in and of itself was like a performance or a ritual. We also have, it's always fun to talk about sidewalk art or chalk art, these sort of fooling your eyes, which is called trompe-l'oeil. It's this idea of like making these sidewalk chalks that look like they're a hole into the ground, or and this is very public. It's very process oriented, and at the end of the day, it's not going to last very long, which is pretty cool. Andy Goldsworthy also is a good example of like nature artists, right? We'll talk more about these later, but artists who make earthworks, so they use the natural objects around them to create things, and they can be sort of moving or almost, you think about like Stonehenge is just like a stack of rocks, and Goldsworthy does this sort of stuff, and here actually he's like pinning together these reeds, an image on the right, and actually if you watch the documentary about him, Rivers and Tides, I think is the name of it. It actually, this piece falls apart, as he's basically finishing the interview, and you can tell he's very frustrated, but it's also that's part of it, the temporary or ephemeral nature of it. Yeah, so that gets us through, just talking about different types of art, and what art is. I'm actually going to stop sharing. And then I'm going to go ahead and save chapter 3 for another day, just because chapter 2 for another day. Oh, this has been part 2 of chapter 2. Man, I got real thrown off when that video cut short. I said earlier this was chapter 1. This is part 2 of chapter 2. And we will cover chapter 3 on another slide, right? Oh, the end of this is a mess. I don't feel like re-recording it though, so enjoy just this last few goofy minutes. Okay, yeah, end of chapter 2, chapter 3. Look for an assignment to be related to the questions from earlier. But yeah, that covers it all. Thank you, and let me know if you have questions.